The teacher grabbed her test, tore it in half and dropped it on the floor. He called her a disgrace. He said she didn't belong here. He didn't know she spent every night studying the state's legal code by flashlight. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She just stared at him. 1 second, 2, 3. And when he leaned closer to say one more thing, he made the mistake that changed everything. Before we begin, drop a comment with where you're watching from. And if you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe. Because tomorrow's episode takes you inside a courtroom. No camera was ever allowed to film. They said she came from nowhere. The neighborhood was lined with broken fences, liquor stores, and churches with peeling paint. Her jacket was too thin for the cold. Her shoes had holes near the toes, and her lunch was usually just a half banana wrapped in foil. On the first day of class, no one sat beside her. By the third week, they whispered "Project Rat" every time she walked by. One of the girls laughed loud enough for her to hear and said she probably couldn't even spell university, but she didn't flinch. She raised her hand, answered every question, and never missed a single assignment. That's when they started watching her. Not because they respected her, but because they didn't believe someone like her could be real. Then came the first test. She scored a perfect 100. Her name was written in red ink at the top, circled almost like a dare. The next day, the teacher called her up. He held her paper in one hand, his voice dripping sarcasm, and asked her to explain how she got every answer right. She began to speak, but he interrupted. "You expect us to believe this?" he said. "This? From you?" Then, in front of the class, he ripped the paper in half. "We don't tolerate cheaters here," he said, eyes locked on hers, daring her to react. She didn't. She picked up the torn paper and walked back to her seat without a word. That silence was her armor. But the moment shifted something in the room. It wasn't just about her anymore. Other students started looking over their shoulders as if fearing they might be next. The system that was supposed to lift them was now choosing who to discard. Her humiliation became a warning, loud and clear. Keep quiet, stay small, don't stand out. And that's how injustice begins, not always with a punch, but with a whisper. That spreads like rot through the walls. After the torn test, silence followed her like a shadow. She tried to slip through the days unnoticed, head low, voice quiet, but the hallways had long memories. One morning, a printed flyer appeared on the lockers. No name, no signature, just a single line in bold. She cheated her way in. Ask who helped her. Whispers bloomed like weeds. They said she must have had a powerful uncle, a secret deal, a paid bribe. One teacher, the one who had torn her test, warned her not to try any special tricks in his class again. Another confiscated her essay before she could submit it and muttered something about checking for originality. And then came the council vote. The Honor Society nomination list was announced, and her name, though top of the class, was missing. When she asked why, the faculty advisor said, without looking up, that character mattered as much as grades. She stood before a panel of 5 adults in pressed suits, one of whom openly yawned as she tried to speak. But they didn't let her finish. They said the school had a reputation to protect, and that sometimes a quiet dismissal was kinder than public exposure. Her voice caught in her throat, not from shame but fury she wasn't allowed to show. Behind her, a janitor paused mid-sweep, listening. Outside the room, a group of students took a photo through the glass and laughed as she sat motionless. And, across town, a local education blogger published a piece about disciplinary concerns surrounding a student whose sudden academic rise raised suspicions. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew. And while she sat at her desk that night trying to study through the noise, the walls of the system pressed tighter. A girl trying to learn became a threat to protect against. The smear wasn't about one test anymore. It was about reminding everyone where the line stood and who wasn't allowed to cross it. The letter came folded in thirds, slipped into her locker without a name. It said she was being suspended for 2 weeks due to unresolved disciplinary concerns. No hearing, no discussion, just a decision made somewhere she wasn't allowed to sit. She took the paper home and laid it flat on the kitchen table, where her grandmother stared at it for a long time without speaking. That night she didn't sleep. Instead, she searched every inch of the state's education code. She printed statutes, underlined clauses, and drafted a written complaint. It wasn't emotion that filled the pages. It was evidence. Timelines. Contradictions, patterns. She addressed the letter to the district office, added a return receipt, and mailed it herself before sunrise. But when she returned to school, nothing had changed. The hallway parted around her like she was a disease. In her seat, someone had taped a note that read, "You people don't belong here." The teacher didn't remove it. Instead, he told her to ignore childish drama and reminded her to stay focused. During lunch, she opened her bag to find it soaked in milk. Her textbooks were ruined. No one looked at her, no one offered help. The system had spoken and the students had listened. That week, a fight broke out near the gym. A girl was pushed, screamed, swung back. But security only pulled one person aside. Her. Even though she wasn't involved, even though witnesses stood by, no one said a word. They called it reputation-based risk removal. And on the administrative report it read, "Student has a pattern of involvement in hostile interactions." That phrase would follow her for years. In the office, the security footage showed the fight from two angles, but the key seconds, the ones that proved her absence, had static, glitches, missing frames. She sat there, watching a lie become her new record. No protest, no appeal, just silence, like always. But this time, her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy, a plan building under the weight of each injustice. And every erased second, every ignored fact, was becoming a weapon she was learning how to use. She never expected anyone to help her. So when the file arrived in her locker, tucked inside an unmarked envelope, her first instinct was to hide it. She opened it only once in the bathroom with the stall locked and saw a flash drive and a single post-it note that said, "They missed a camera." That night, she watched it on her grandmother's old laptop, heart pounding as the screen lit up with grainy footage. The fight by the gym. 3 girls yelling, 2 pushing, she in the background, walking the opposite way. The timestamp was clear. The audio, damaged but intact, picked up the scream and the moment she looked back in confusion, not involvement. It was the proof that had disappeared from the official feed. She didn't know who had sent it, but she knew who to give it to. A lawyer's office across town offered free consultations on Fridays. She waited 2 hours to speak for 7 minutes. They said she had a case but needed to gather more, so she started documenting. Every insult, every ripped notebook, every detention slip without explanation. And while she built her own archive, a figure in the back row of her class began to notice. A quiet boy with headphones always on, who never looked up unless called. One day, after everyone left, he slid his laptop toward her and pressed play. Dad showed her standing in the hallway as the teacher read the Honor Society list. Her name missing, the look on her face, and the smirk on the advisors. He said nothing, just nodded once and left. That moment unlocked something. She wasn't alone. She was being watched, yes, but not just by those who wanted her to fail. There were witnesses, people who couldn't speak loud but knew what wrong looked like. And with each new clip, each page she filed, her silence began to shift into something sharper. Not just survival, strategy, not just resistance, record-keeping. Because one day the world wouldn't ask what happened. It would ask what she could prove. The auditorium was full. Teachers lined the walls. Parents packed the seats and cameras blinked red in the back of the room. It was the state debate finals, and she stood at the podium in a borrowed blazer, hands steady, voice like glass over steel. Her argument dismantled the resolution piece by piece, citing precedents most of the judges hadn't even heard before. When she finished, the silence was thick, then applause, and then a pause. The event moderator stepped forward and asked her to stay on stage. A faculty member whispered something into his ear. The moderator frowned, then leaned toward the microphone. Due to concerns regarding the originality of her material, this performance is under review. Gasps, whispers. One of the judges stood up and left without explanation. Her chest burned, but she didn't speak. She stood still, steady, silent. As cameras panned to her face, Hours later, a blog post appeared questioning whether her advanced vocabulary was appropriate for someone from her background. A former student commented that she must be sleeping with someone to get that far. The comment was anonymous, but shared thousands of times, her inbox filled with slurs, threats, and the quiet venom of people who believed they were protecting something. She walked into school the next day and found her locker painted red, with the word liar dripping down. Administration called it a student misunderstanding. A guidance counselor suggested she take a few days off. But she stayed. She scrubbed the locker herself. She sat through each class. And at lunch, she sat alone, flipping through a worn copy of the state legal code. She marked a statute on educational defamation, circled a clause on retaliation, underlined a line about due process in extracurricular competitions, because she knew now this was more than a personal attack. It was an institutional message. They wanted her to know that excellence didn't protect her, that rising too far would trigger something colder than jealousy. It would awaken defense, of image, of order, of what certain people believed the law should look like, and to them it didn't look like her. Not yet. They told her to let it go. Her grandmother begged her to transfer. Her cousin said college wouldn't want someone with that much baggage. Even the kind lawyer she met once gently recommended she take a gap year. She said nothing. She packed her things in silence and walked away from the school building without a single glance back. But she didn't go nowhere. She went inward, into books, into pages, into law. She found the public library in the next town and made it her second home. She requested case files. She borrowed manuals on civil procedure, education code, and federal protections against academic retaliation. Every morning she read with a highlighter between her fingers. Every night she printed sections to memorize. She didn't cry. She studied. She turned every word they used against her into language she would someday control. Over 3 months, she assembled a document over 400 pages long. It detailed each incident, each date, each witness, each email. She included screenshots, annotations, a copy of the anonymous flyer, and the glitch-filled security footage with written timestamps. She bound it, numbered it, indexed it, and sent it by registered mail to the state's Department of Education and Office of Civil Rights. She didn't expect a miracle. She just wanted it on record. She wanted someone somewhere to read it and know she was not the lie they wrote about. The girl who had been humiliated on stage was now a girl with a file thicker than most criminal cases. A girl who understood how to build a legal wall tall enough to outlast rumors. That winter, while other students applied to college, she studied alone. She applied to one school, a quiet, underfunded law program far away from the whispers. They accepted her, gave her a small scholarship, and when she arrived, she didn't speak of where she came from. She just sat in the front row, took notes, and waited, because the girl they had tried to erase was no longer waiting for justice. She was learning how to write it. The invitation came in a plain envelope with a blue seal. It was addressed to her, not her school, not her parents, not any advisor. It was from the National Youth Legal Scholars Forum, a quiet but respected competition that focused not on speaking, but on writing. Real arguments, real law, no spotlight, just logic. She submitted her piece 3 minutes before the deadline. She didn't sign it with her name, only her ID number. It was an essay on due process failures in public education. 17 pages, footnotes, cited cases, sections that quoted directly from her own experience, but anonymized, clinical, surgical. She didn't tell anyone she entered, not her grandmother, not her professors, not the boy from her old school who still sent her articles every month. She won. The letter arrived on a Thursday. She read it twice, then folded it, then read it again. She was invited to D.C. to accept the award and speak at the student legislative session. That night she slept with the letter under her pillow. But the morning she was set to leave, an email landed in her inbox. The subject line was, "Academic Misconduct Inquiry." The sender, the same teacher who had once ripped her test in front of the class. Somehow he had obtained a copy of her essay. He accused her of plagiarizing a law review article, Attached was a red-line document comparing sentences she had written to those published in a paid-access journal. The similarities were laughable. Generic legal phrasing, definitions. But the damage was instant. Online forums erupted. Anonymous accounts questioned how someone with her background could produce something that clean. A commentator asked if affirmative action included ghostwriting now. The forum tagged her photo, the one from the debate. They called her a fraud. The forum paused her award. They said they needed to investigate. Her flight was cancelled. She sat in her apartment, staring at her closed suitcase, listening to the silence from every voice that had once encouraged her. No one called. No one defended her publicly. But she didn't cry. She logged off. She pulled out the printout she had saved of the state's whistleblower protection statute. She drafted a letter. Not emotional, just facts. She included the metadata of the document she submitted, time-stamped revisions, her email trail, a declaration signed by a professor confirming her authorship. She sent it. Then she waited, not as a victim, as a legal actor building her own precedent, because for the first time they weren't just trying to silence her, they were trying to erase her intellect, and she wasn't going to let them. The award was reinstated exactly 12 days later. No apology. Just a new letter with the same seal and a new date for the ceremony. She boarded the train alone, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and the same blazer from her debate. When she arrived in D.C., she was quiet. She shook hands, smiled politely, and waited her turn. The room was lined with students from elite schools, children of senators, legacy names, polished shoes, soft voices. No one spoke to her, until a man approached, silver-haired, sharp-suited, and oddly familiar. He introduced himself not as a judge or a sponsor, but as someone who had once stood on that stage 2 decades ago. He asked for her name. She gave it. He paused, then nodded slowly and said, "Your father once cross-examined me." She blinked. He continued, "I was a young assistant U.S. attorney. He made me look like a fool. But he was right." She didn't speak. He looked down, then said, "He was one of the best civil rights attorneys this state ever produced. I heard what happened to him. I'm sorry." The silence between them was different, not heavy, reverent. She whispered, "I wasn't allowed to talk about him." He nodded again. "Then let them remember him now through you." He introduced her to the panel as the closing speaker, not because of the award, because of the history. That night, during her speech, she didn't tell her story. She told her father's, the courtroom battles, the threats, the victories, the day he collapsed after a trial defending 3 students, expelled for organizing a protest. She spoke like someone who had bled beside justice, not just studied it. When she finished, the room didn't clap at first. They stood, slowly, one by one. She walked off stage and was met by someone from the Department of Justice. They asked if she had ever considered clerking. She smiled but said nothing. That evening, the photos went viral. But not for the reasons they expected, not because of the speech or the award, because someone posted a side-by-side image, her father in court 30 years ago, and her on that same stage, same eyes, same calm, same fire. The comments changed. From "who does she think she is" to "she's exactly who she was born to be." And for the first time, she didn't have to hide her name. She carried it like a verdict, one that had been delayed for years, but finally delivered. She returned from D.C. thinking it might finally be over, that perhaps the silence she walked into would mean peace, or at least a pause, but the system had only been waiting. The principal of her former school filed a formal complaint to the scholarship board, claiming her rise was built on misrepresented credentials. A group of parents calling themselves Protect Our Classrooms began circulating letters accusing her of manipulating her narrative to gain political attention. The same teacher who once tore her test appeared on a local news interview, suggesting that the education system was being hijacked by students who knew how to play the race card. Even the superintendent released a statement calling for a review of student privacy rights in competitive programs, clearly pointed but carefully worded. Her scholarship was frozen. Her eligibility for law externships was put under administrative review. Her law school advisor warned her that future employers were asking questions. One even suggested she step down from a moot court role to avoid drawing controversy. They didn't use slurs. They used process. They didn't call her a threat. They called her a disruption, and still she did not respond, not publicly, not emotionally. She filed 2 FOIA requests for all correspondence mentioning her name within the district. She compiled documentation of every retaliatory measure. She found that a third-party PR firm had been hired using district funds to handle media narratives about her case. When she traced the invoices, she found dates that aligned with her award ceremony, and still no one inside the system spoke up. They closed ranks, but she didn't knock. She built a new door. With the help of the quiet boy from her high school who now coded professionally, she created a website, a digital archive, not opinion, evidence, scanned documents, recorded interviews, timeline summaries. No headlines, just facts. Within 24 hours, it crashed from traffic. In 48, it was cited by a legal blog. In 72, a journalist from the Capitol called her. But still, she said nothing, because she understood now that justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits, sharp, focused, ready. And while they built rumors, she built a record, because the next time they came for her, it wouldn't be her name on trial. It would be theirs. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. It was closed to the public, held in a windowless room on the 5th floor of the State Education Board. She arrived early, wearing the same blazer, this time buttoned, pressed, and calm. Opposite her sat the review committee, 6 members with nameplates and coffee cups, all pretending not to know who she was before reading her file. They called it a character review. They cited anonymous tips, media attention, and public concern. But she had heard those words before. They were masks for fear, for control. She did not come alone. At her side were 3 law students who had quietly asked to help her. Each of them brought copies of her documentation, bound and indexed. She spoke for exactly 12 minutes. She began with definitions, then statutes, then precedent. She walked them through each act of retaliation, tied it to specific policies violated, and outlined the structural failures that allowed misconduct to go unpunished. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She constructed, brick by brick, line by line. She reminded them that silence was complicity, and that misusing policy to punish speech was not just immoral. It was unconstitutional. When she finished, the room was still. One member shifted, then cleared his throat and asked if she had anything personal to say. She looked at him and replied, "I already did, in the documentation." The decision was not announced that day, but by Friday, her scholarship was fully reinstated, her academic record was cleared, and her law school released a statement affirming her standing as a student in good academic and ethical status. They didn't mention the hearing. They didn't need to, because something bigger had shifted. She wasn't a student on trial anymore. She was a force in motion, and the people who once called her trouble were now being asked why they were so afraid of a girl who simply followed the law better than they did. They did not stop. The hearing might have ended in her favor, but the people behind the curtain had not forgotten how she made them look. A news anchor hinted at sealed juvenile records that did not exist, a social media account with thousands of followers posted a fake message thread alleging she seduced a professor to get a recommendation letter. It spread fast, too fast. Within hours, bots filled the comments on every article about her. Emails were sent to her law school classmates with screenshots that looked real but weren't. They started whispering again, avoiding her, professors. Paused when they saw her enter the room. Then came the worst of it. Her private files were leaked, her scholarship application, her financial aid forms, even a therapist's letter from when she was 13, marked confidential, describing the panic attacks she had after her father died. She didn't cry. She unplugged everything, shut it all down. She sat in her room for 16 hours, without moving. Then she stood up, printed every file that had been leaked, every message sent to her, every article, every accusation, and she laid them out on the floor like evidence in a courtroom, because that's what it was, a coordinated character assassination. The question wasn't whether it was real, it was who paid for it. The next morning, she walked into a local cybersecurity firm with her binder and said 5 words. "I think I'm being targeted." Within 2 weeks, they traced the attack. Not to some faceless troll, but to a consulting firm that had previously done reputation management work for a school district. Her school district. The invoice was disguised as a PR outreach expense. It listed services including narrative redirection and influence moderation. She gave the evidence to her lawyer. Quietly, strategically, she didn't go public, she didn't scream, she waited. Because now the people who thought they had finally silenced her had just handed her the very rope they would hang themselves with. And she wasn't going to use it in anger. She was going to use it in court. The press conference was held in a narrow downtown hall with bad lighting and too many folding chairs. No fanfare, no anthem, just a podium, 2 microphones, and the sound of doors closing behind curious reporters. Her lawyer spoke first. He laid out a clear timeline of digital harassment, PR invoices, data manipulation, and institutional funding misuse. Then he invited someone to the stage. She hadn't seen him in 4 years. He had once been a faculty aide at her old school. Quiet, bookish, the kind of man who always wore the same blue sweater and never spoke more than necessary. He stepped up to the microphone and cleared his throat. Then he opened a small black folder and began to speak. He testified that years ago, when she was being investigated for cheating, he had seen the principal rewrite the internal disciplinary form, removing the word alleged and replacing it with confirmed before the student hearing. He said he had kept quiet out of fear of losing his job, but when he saw the stories leak last month, he couldn't stay silent. Then he handed over a flash drive. It contained email correspondence between district officials discussing how to control the narrative around her academic success and how to preemptively discredit any future legal action. The room fell still. The reporters who had arrived expecting vague statements now sat forward in their chairs, eyes wide. No one interrupted him. No one challenged the documents, because the words were plain, cold, exact. And when he finished, he said something she would never forget. He looked directly at her and said, "I should have spoken up sooner, but I see now she never needed my protection. She just needed the truth." The silence afterward was a silence of reckoning. Not for her, for them. The people who had built walls of paperwork and policy to keep her in the dark now faced the floodlight of evidence. And it wasn't just one man speaking anymore. It was the start of an avalanche. Within 24 hours, 3 other staff members came forward. The district superintendent announced an emergency internal review, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was climbing a mountain alone. She had never needed rescue, but now the world was finally listening to what she had been building in silence all along. The subpoenas came fast, the names of those once untouchable, now printed plainly on court dockets. The principal, the PR consultant, the teacher, the former superintendent. One by one they were called to testify, and one by one they faltered. Emails couldn't be explained. Invoices didn't match budgets. Statements contradicted each other. She didn't attend every hearing. She didn't need to. The facts were enough now. Her presence wasn't a symbol of defiance anymore. It was a reminder of what happens when a target refuses to disappear. Her university released a public acknowledgement of her legal contributions to academic equity. A law firm extended an offer before she even graduated, but she declined it, quietly, respectfully, because something else had already been offered. An invitation from Harvard Law, full scholarship, research appointment, optional clerkship after graduation. And in that moment, sitting in her grandmother's kitchen with the acceptance letter in one hand and a steaming bowl of rice in the other, she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Relief. Not because the fight was over, but because it had finally turned. She stood that afternoon in front of the mirror and spoke her full name aloud, not with pride, with clarity. Because now, when people said her name, they didn't whisper it in warning. They didn't laugh it. Through clenched teeth, they spoke it with pause, with weight, with something that sounded like respect. And as word spread about the investigation, more students from other districts reached out. Some had been punished unfairly. Others had stories that never made it past the counselor's desk. She read every message, filed them, and decided she wouldn't just win her case. She would make space for others to bring theirs. Her story, once mocked and erased, was now studied in policy discussions. It wasn't her victory alone. It was a shift, a crack in the old foundation. The girl they tried to remove had not only remained, she had redesigned the room. And now she was preparing to build a new one. She never celebrated loudly. There was no party, no confetti, just a small dinner at home, her grandmother's favorite stew on the stove, and a stack of letters from students she had never met. Some wrote about being suspended for defending themselves. Others had been silenced after reporting abuse. A few had dropped out entirely. She didn't respond to all of them, but she saved every word. Harvard Law wasn't the end of her story, it was a door. One she walked through not just for herself, but carrying every name that had been crossed out like hers had once been, in day. Her first week she spoke once in class, calm, precise, then quiet again. But her classmates remembered. Her professors listened. And in the back of the lecture hall, one first-year student from Detroit sat straighter when he heard her voice, because he recognized it. Not her fame, her fight. At night, she walked past the library steps and saw a new mural on the wall. It didn't have her face, just a quote in soft gold paint. It read, "If they won't open the door, study the lock." Below it, a single name. Her father's. Because that was the twist the world never expected, that her strength didn't come from revenge. It came from legacy. And as the city slept, as buildings dimmed and courtrooms locked their doors, her story stayed. Not as noise, as precedent. The kind that reshapes the next case. The kind they whisper about when deciding whether to try and break someone like her again. And somewhere out there, a teacher pauses before tearing another paper in half. A principal hesitates before calling a student a risk. And a girl, quiet in the back of a classroom, remembers that justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes it studies, sometimes it waits, and sometimes it graduates top of Harvard Law. Thank you for watching till the end. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Race and Quality for new inspiring stories every day. Don't forget to like this video and share it with others to spread the message. We have more incredible stories waiting for you. Just click the video on the screen. Subscribe and join our community of courageous voices. See you in the next video.